Dear Jesus, divine physician and healer of the sick, we turn to you in this time of illness, O dearest comforter of the troubled.
Am I dead?
No, my son, but you are wounded.
What? What?
Hello gamers, and welcome back to another episode of Dice Camera Action. My name is John Bove, and today I'm going to be reviewing Nightfall. Nightfall is a deck building game from AEG for 2 to 5 players. It takes about 45 minutes to play. There's a unique chaining mechanic in the game, and the goal is to get the least amount of wounds. Let's take a look at the components. Nightfall comes with 228 order cards, 60 wound cards, 24 draft cards, 34 card dividers, and a rulebook. The rulebook in Nightfall is pretty good. I remember having some questions when I first got the game, but with some help from Board Game Geek and more playthroughs, the game makes perfect sense now. The cards in Nightfall are decent quality. I wouldn't call them the best, but they certainly aren't bad. However, I decided to sleeve them anyway. The box uses foam inserts along with the card dividers to help organize the cards. I am a bit conflicted on this. At first I thought it stunk, and would have preferred a Dominion-like box where everything is divided. But once I actually consolidated one of the Nightfall expansions into the base box, I realized how beneficial it is to have a customizable solution. Overall, the components are pretty good. When you take cards out, they tend to slide around under the foam, but it's not a big deal. Let's take a look at how to set up a 3-player game. To set up Nightfall, first shuffle all the wound cards, then place them face down on the table. Then flip over 10 cards per player, so in a 3-player game, flip over the top 30 cards face up. Now give each player a starting deck. Each starting deck is the same and has 2 copies of each of the 6 different starting minions. Then, shuffle all the draft cards together and deal 8 minus the number of players onto the center of the table. This is called the commons. Everyone can buy these cards. So in a 3-player game, there would be 5 cards in the commons at this point. Now deal 4 draft cards, face down, to each player. Each player chooses 1 card for his private archive, where only that player can buy that card. After the first card is chosen, pass the cards to the left and choose your second private archive. Then pass the remaining 2 cards to the left. Now you choose one of these cards to be placed in the commons, while the remaining card will not be used in this game. Once you've done this, replace every draft card with the corresponding cards from the box. And that's how you set up Nightfall. Notice that I set up the commons before the players drafted their cards. This is not in the original rulebook, but is actually in the updated rulebooks in the expansions, and I think it's a better way to play. Let's take a look at the cards now. There are 3 types of cards in Nightfall: minions, actions, and wounds. Note that minions and actions are referred to as orders. Let's take a look at a minion. This is Overwatch 2. Let's look at the 3 moons on the top left of this card. The biggest moon represents the color of the card. Overwatch 2 is a blue card. The smaller moons represent the colors of cards that can be chained to Overwatch 2. We will get to chaining a bit later. The red dashes around the card represent the health of the minion. When damaged, rotate the card so that the current health status is facing up. The red number on the top right is the strength of the card and affects combat. The yellow number on the side is the cost of the card. Currency in Nightfall is called influence. Under the name of the card is the type of minion, along with some flavor text. This only concerns other expansions of the game. Under that is the text area, where the abilities of the card are listed. Overwatch 2 has an effect that happens when the card is resolved from a chain. We will get to that later. At the very bottom is the kicker effect. When Overwatch 2 is played on a purple card, the effect would take place. Action cards have a gray border, rather than the black of the minions. Action cards are very similar to minions, except they do not have health or strength, and are discarded after they are resolved in a chain. And those are the cards in Nightfall. They're pretty easy to understand once you play a couple times. Let's take a look at how to play now. The first phase of your turn is the combat phase. Any minions you currently have in play will automatically attack. You get to choose which players you are attacking with which minions. The defending players will choose minions to block damage. A blocking minion can only block a single attacking minion, however multiple minions can block a single attacking minion. After damage is dealt out, the players take wounds from the wound deck equal to the damage they were unable to block. Once combat is done, you discard all minions you have in play. However, starting minions, which have yellow text, are removed from the game. Also, some cards have the ability to stay in play, such as Bad Smoke. The next phase in your turn is the chain phase. You start by playing any card from your hand, then attach any cards with matching moons as we discussed earlier. When you are done, your opponents will have the opportunity to attach their own cards. In clockwise order, once everyone has had a chance to attach cards, the last player to chain a card will resolve his cards. This is referred to as last in, first out. When minions are resolved, they go in front of the player that chained them. When actions are resolved, they are discarded after their effect. Minions can have effects too. Any effect that says chain would happen when it's resolved from the chain. For example, when Lilith Lawrence is resolved, its chain effect is to deal 1 damage to target player. So this player decides to deal damage to one of his opponents. Then you continue resolving the chain. The next phase is the claim phase. This is where you can purchase cards from either your private archives or the commons. You start every turn with 2 influence. You can discard cards now to gain more influence. Each card discarded gives you 1 influence. You can buy as many cards as you can afford and place them in your discard pile. Influence does not carry over from turn to turn, and you do not need to spend all of it. Last is the cleanup phase. First you draw back up to 5 if necessary, then you can resolve a wound effect. If you have any wounds, you discard them and draw 2 cards for each wound discarded. If you draw any more wounds from this effect, you cannot use the effect again on them. Nightfall is over when the wound deck runs out. Whoever has the least number of wounds wins. In case of a tie, look at the keywords on each wound. These are bite, bleed, and burn. Each player compares their highest count of one of the keywords. Whoever has the lowest high count wins. If you are still tied, compare the second highest total. If you are still tied after that, the person closest to the right of the first player wins. And those are the rules of Nightfall. Before I move on to an example turn, let me explain direct damage, which can be a confusing part of the game. In Nightfall, some cards deal direct damage when they target a player. Normally minions cannot block unless it is the combat phase. However, it's important to note that Bad Smoke and Vukul are special in this case. Anytime you are going to take damage, Bad Smoke and Vukul automatically defend. And that's direct damage. It's pretty simple. Let's move on to an example turn now. This is an example of a 2-player game. It is the player on the right's turn. He automatically attacks the other player with his 2 minions already in play. The opponent has a minion in play with 1 health and decides to block against JJ McTeague, who has a strength of 2. JJ and Lilith Lawrence attack on the right, while Enraged on the left defends 1 damage. Enraged is destroyed and exiled, or removed, from the game because it is a starting minion. JJ and Lilith deal a total of 3 damage. JJ only does 1 because Enraged defended, and Lilith does 2, so the player on the left takes 3 wounds. JJ is exiled from the game, and Lilith goes to the discard pile. The other player takes his wounds. Now it's time to chain. First the player on the right chains Franz Orlok, then Overwatch 2, then Vuko. He is done chaining. The player on the left now has a chance to chain, and puts down Rend and Tear and Overwatch 2. The player on the left will resolve first. Remember, last in, first out. Overwatch 2 is placed in front of the player, who draws a card because of Overwatch's chain effect. Now Rend and Tear is resolved, and the player on the left deals 2 damage to the player on the right, who takes 2 wounds because he doesn't have Bad Smoke or Vukul in play to block direct damage. Now it's time to resolve the cards for the player on the right. Vukul goes into play, he has no chain effect. Then Overwatch 2 goes into play, and the player draws 1 card. The kicker for Overwatch 2 also happens because it was played on a purple card. The kicker doesn't have an effect right now though. Finally, Franz Orlok is put into play. His chain effect is to deal 2 damage to the target player. The other player takes 2 wounds. Remember, this is a 2-player game. With more people, target player can refer to any player of your choice. Now it's the claim phase, where the player on the right gets to take new orders. Everyone starts with 2 influence on their own turns, but he decides it's not enough. He discards 2 cards to gain 2 more influence. He then buys another Overwatch 2 and Lilith Lawrence for a total of 4. Finally, during the cleanup phase, he draws back up to 5 cards. He happens to get 2 wounds, so he uses the wound effect to discard them, and draws 4 more cards. His pile is empty before he finishes drawing, so he shuffles it and finishes drawing. Overall, I think Nightfall is a really good game. It's quickly become one of my favorites. That's not to say it's perfect though. I feel like 2-player games are a little imbalanced. If you don't draw the right cards or you make a mistake, your opponent can come out way ahead of you, and it may feel like it's really hard to catch up. I definitely think Nightfall has a great theme and some awesome illustrations. Nightfall's MSRP is $40, but you can get it for $25 on Amazon. Of course, I always recommend you support your local game store whenever possible. If you're in the market for a new deck builder, you should definitely check out Nightfall. I have to say, I really recommend the iOS version of the game that comes from Playdeck Games. They have really awesome user interfaces, and it makes the game a blast to play. The game's on sale right now for $1 in the App Store. I paid $5 and I thought it was worth it. You should definitely check it out for $1. Well, that's all I have for today, gamers. Thank you so much for watching. Check the description below for a link to my Facebook, Google+, Twitter, email, and Board Game Geek collection. And as always, let me know what games you want to see reviewed. Until next time.